Welcome everybody to this panel. We are going to be talking about the future of guardrails for AI safety, responsible AI. We have three amazing panelists today representing three very big companies that are at the foreground of launching AI models at scale. We have Oracle, Meta, OpenAI. Today the focus is going to be very much on a practical side. So a little bit less on the theory and more about what builders and developers need to consider in order to build, ship, and manage production systems that are using AI in a responsible and fair manner. And we will start with some introductions. So my name is Daniel. I am a senior director level IC at LinkedIn, working in the union between AI and trust. And the mission of the team that I'm in is to keep our platform professional, safe, and trusted, not only on the typical products that you may be using, like, for instance, feed, jobs, ads, but also some of the new generative AI-powered products that we are launching. And one thing that I will be asking each one of the panelists is to give a small interesting fact that might be interesting for the whole audience. So I will start also with that. By the way, I thought that it was interesting till whenever I was talking to Rachad. So I have 3 nationalities. I thought that was interesting till he said that he has 4. So, so he destroyed my interest fact even before. But yeah, do you want to go forward?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet all of you. My name is Krishnaram, or Krishna for short. I'm the chief scientist for clinical AI at Oracle. We are building a digital assistant and AI-based tools to reduce administrative overhead and clinical burnout of doctors and other medical professionals. Before joining Oracle, I have been working in the area of responsible AI for the last several years. On that front, an interesting fact for me is that I started working on data privacy motivated by some of the healthcare applications. And after several years, now I'm back working hands-on healthcare. And on the personal front, I speak a language, Indian language, that if you perhaps randomly poll somebody from India, like, they may not have even heard of.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachad. I'm a senior director at Meta. And I lead our trust and safety effort for our generative AI org. Before joining Meta, I was doing something similar at Google, running applied RAI for Gemini in Google Research. I have one fact. This one, I'll see if anybody can even top that. In addition to the nationalities, I'm one of 16 siblings. So statistically, it's possible, but I'm sure very few people have that many siblings. Amazing. I'm very good at negotiating.
Hi everyone, my name's Jake. I lead the integrity product team at OpenAI. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years. Before I joined OpenAI, I spent just short of 5 years at Instacart and about just shy of 10 years at Meta. All 3 places I've worked on sort of a wide variety of products, but I suppose part of the reason I'm here today is that I've been the first trust and safety PM at all 3 places I've worked at. And I suppose my interesting fact is that the fact that I'm here is pretty bizarre if you look at where my career started. I thought I wanted to be a therapist, and my first job out of college was I worked at an inpatient adult psychiatric unit. And I got really good at dodging punches there.
Well, thank you very much and welcome to the panel. So let's start with the basics. Whenever we are talking about AI, everyone is very often thinking of extremes, either the big potential, the big opportunity, but also the big danger. Like, there is even this book, the Coming Wave, where they are talking about AI safety in the context of autonomous weapons or runaway Gen AI. General intelligence. So, but for the builders and engineers here today, the meaning probably has to be a lot more grounded. So, Jake, let's start with you. How do you define AI safety in the context of real-world product development today?
Yeah, The interesting thing about AI safety is it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people in a lot of different contexts. So at OpenAI, we try to be as concrete as possible about what safety means and how to balance that with rapid product development and making sure that we're fulfilling our mission of building AGI that benefits all of humanity. And so when we talk about AI safety, we try to anchor it as much as possible in the model and usage policies that we've built, and trying to do as much as we can to mitigate risks while deploying models and bringing their benefits to the world. In particular, when we talk about AI safety, we are most focused on catastrophic risks. And the way we define catastrophic risks is based in our preparedness framework, and there's a particular focus on bio and chem capabilities, on cyber capabilities, and AI self-improvement capabilities.
Cool. And Krishnaram and Rachad, perhaps, can you tell us about a common misconception that you hear about AI safety and responsible AI, especially from the people that are building and deploying products?
So maybe less of a misconception, but kind of more of something maybe impractical that often the developers might think, right, is that an AI system needs to have a perfect safety before it gets piloted or deployed. I think in reality that almost never is possible, partly because we may not even know what may be some of the kind of harms that unknown unknowns, or like the harms that we may not be aware of. So I think to avoid that misconception, perhaps a better approach is to do as much thorough and rigorous testing as possible during development, but then start iterative deployment, where you start with maybe a small controlled group of evaluations, or like maybe more trusted set of users if possible, get their feedback, and then kind of gradually expand from there. And as you learn new types of issues that you may not have even anticipated, to kind of go back and correct and improve the model. So it's kind of one concrete example of this is if you look at what happened after the Bing AI was launched, and there are kind of the interaction of the New York Times journalist with the Bing AI. To be kind of fair, Microsoft has one of the best RAI and AI safety teams. So they must have done very thorough evaluation, and in spite of that, the fact that there are these kinds of interactions which no one anticipated, I think that should be a lesson for all of us, that we should not wait for the perfection. Instead, kind of start with iterative deployment, learn from that. In fact, this is a theme that I hear a lot recently, even in the recent book, Super Agency, Reid Hoffman talks about the notion of iterative deployment and the idea of permissionless innovation as opposed to what he calls his precautionary principle, right? Where you're kind of always taking extremely precautious stand, and instead it's better to kind of innovate, get the product out to users gradually, learn from mistakes and correct and improve from there.
No, plus one to that. I can really relate to both the lack of existence of perfect safety, but also to your very practical approach of iterative deployment and being able to adjust as you scale. The reality is that, especially for Gen AI based type of product, the amount of safety you're gonna get sometimes and very often is in tension with the benefits and the capabilities that we will unleash. It's not just new. It's just not unique to Gen AI. I mean, you have for a number of technologies very similar tension. If I tell you today that I'm gonna develop a game-changing technology, it's gonna be so game-changing that you want it and you need it and use it every day. But unfortunately, that technology will kill about 40,000 people a year. First reaction was, are you crazy? I'm not launching any of that. Until you can get that risk to zero, we don't want that tech. Today, that tech is called the automobile. And we use it every day. And unfortunately, it has side effects in the US where many people do tragically lose their life. But the benefit of that tech so much outweigh the cost that we as a society are willing to go along with it. Now, you don't need to go to those extremes to justify any technology, but it's just a reminder that in many cases, you're going to have this tension between utility and safety. And as you build those systems, what you want to do is you want to maximize the benefit that we all get from that while absolutely minimizing the side effect and maximizing the safety that comes from those systems.
I had not heard the fact about, or the number about the automobile, so super interesting. I think for the questions, we are going to be focusing, if time allows, in 4 different areas. We'll be covering robustness, control, responsible AI, and governance. So starting with the robustness, reliability, risk mitigation, in your experience, and let's start with Jake, and then Rachad, perhaps you can follow. What practical methods do teams use to assess and mitigate robustness risk, like model failures, adversarial input, or degraded performance in edge cases?
So the key here is there is no silver bullet. We believe a lot in building defenses in layers. At the foundation, there's a lot of importance of having a really secure and safe infrastructure so that you're safeguarding people's data, so that you're preventing access to sensitive data model weights from adversaries. Then there's what do you do for training models to ensure their safety? Well, first and foremost, there's training safety data directly into the model so it can learn to refuse unsafe prompts. And then one thing we do on top of that is we build a series of input and output classifiers on top of our models. Input classifiers to detect if someone is trying to submit a prompt that is trying to elicit unsafe content, and output classifiers to try to detect if the model has generated unsafe content. And then to supplement those model level protections, we do a lot of detection and monitoring of other behavioral type signals, things like account metadata, behavioral data, network data, device level data. And then on top of all of that, we supplement all of our protections with red teaming. We do automated and manual red teaming before we launch new models, and we continue that red teaming after we launch models.
I like that very much. That's very much in line with what I've seen done in other places, in other labs in the industry, and what we also do at Meta. On the alignment front, obviously, because of the type of model we do build, we start very early on even doing pre-training because we do release the weight of those models, both pre-train and post-train, which means that the models themselves have to be relatively safe even though people have access to those weights. So we start very early on doing pre-training to ensure that the models that we build adhere to a certain set of policies that we care about and are generally pretty safe as we define safety and responsibility. And as we pre-train those models, doing post-training, we do reinforce and force the alignment of those models toward those policies using a variety of techniques, alignment techniques like supervised fine-tuning or reinforcement learning to do so. And then finally, similarly to what Jake was describing, we do a lot of evaluation of those models to ensure that we meet the minimum targets that we need to feel confident that those models are safe for a variety of use cases. To do so, we do large-scale evaluation of those models across a number of dimensions, from content generation risk to child safety risk to more, let's just say, severe risk ones like catastrophic risk related to national security, like chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear type of risk. These are done both in a scale fashion, but also thoroughly using uplift studies with experts, with instrumented models that allows us to test the upper bound of what those models are capable in this particular regime. Once you have a model, though, to Jake's points, I think online safety is one of the biggest things you need to ensure that you have. And there, the actor monitoring part is quite interesting because you can focus on the model, you can focus on all those classifiers at the beginning, at the end. But you tell me who is using the model, I'll tell you already if I'm going to have a risky encounter or not. And that's like, And that's an empirical number. In my previous life in trust and safety, we realized that it's predictive to probably like 60% of, of any interaction. You tell me who I'm talking to, and I can tell you if I'm going to be in trouble already. So it's a very important part of that line of defenses, in addition to all the system-level components that you need to deploy to ensure a safe experience.
No, thank you. I think safety is a spectrum, right? So at some point, how safe is safe enough? And you have to deal with the competitive pressure, with the customer requirements so that you can iterate fast. So there is this balance between shipping fast and also building safe. Perhaps, Krishnaram, if you can tell a little bit about how robustness is played into some of the products that Oracle is building. How do you personally approach or advise on balancing this fast iteration that you were also referring to from the book with building systems that are truly reliable?
So I think one way we have been approaching the kind of the speed and also ensuring safety is, as I alluded to before, looking at different stages. Like for instance, when we're starting to develop a new product, we reach out to the intended users, in our case doctors and other medical professionals, get inputs from them on what would be considered acceptable in that particular setting and what would be not considered acceptable, and use that to influence the kind of guardrails that we need to incorporate into the product. And then once we develop an initial version, we pilot to a smaller group of physicians or medical professionals, and again, like the idea being that then we start seeing how they use in a relatively controlled environment, again get additional inputs, and then gradually roll out to more and more broader set of users. And I think throughout the process, it is important to have mechanisms for obtaining both explicit and implicit feedback. Explicit feedback could be in the form of the users providing different types of, like maybe just even going to them and if possible in an enterprise like setting, maybe interviewing them, asking them what they don't like, what they like, and so forth. And the implicit feedback could be in the form of thumbs up, comments, and so forth, right, in different settings. I think that's a model which we have seen work quite well, where we don't we kind of go in a very iterative fashion and constantly improve over time.
Perhaps following up, since you were talking about feedback, and we can follow up with you still. As builders in the room are, incorporating LLMs into their tools, what Guardrails infrastructure is actually available today to be used by companies? And are these becoming commoditized so that everyone can be using the same ones, or do teams still need to build their own for every use case that they integrate AI on?
So I think today we have a wide spectrum of different types of guardrails from both major cloud providers. For example, the different types of content moderation systems from Azure, AWS, Google, to OpenAI, and several others, as well as various open source offerings. To some extent, you can say that these are becoming a little bit commoditized, but our experience is that often in a specific domain, we may need to customize these guardrails. To again give an example from the healthcare, what may be considered unacceptable in a general purpose setting, like say discussions about suicidal thoughts, the anxiety, depression, sexual abuse, and so forth, may be needed in a healthcare setting when a patient is interacting with the doctor. So we may not want those kinds of content filters or moderations. At the same time, what might be considered acceptable in a general setting may not be acceptable in a healthcare setting. An example of this is we may not want the AI tools to provide medical advice. At least in our case, we are using the AI tools to help address the administrative efforts, like summarize the conversations and so forth. We don't want the AI tools to be providing medical advice. So these are examples where we have to incorporate our own guardrails and principles on what the model should do and what it should not do.
Jake, I'm going to ask you the same question as well from an OpenAI perspective.
Yeah, I think Krishna had a really good answer there. Before I was at OpenAI at Instacart, one of the areas I supported was I led our product work for customer support, and I think we had a somewhat straightforward experience there building out a customer support chatbot. And I think that's a very common use case for LLMs today. It's a very straightforward and beneficial to both the company and end user use case. And when you're doing something like that, I think there's a lot of guardrails that are generically available that will be useful for that sort of general purpose use of an LLM. But to sort of piggyback on what Krishnaram was saying, like as you get into more niche use cases, I think the medical space is a really good example of that. You will likely end up needing to build more customized guardrails because it's just like a much more bespoke use case for which something that's generic and off the shelf won't necessarily get you exactly what you want.
Well, and if we move from guardrails towards alignment, perhaps Rachad, what are some approaches, can be technical or even procedural, that you have seen work well to keep generative AI models on track and aligned with either the user intent or the platform policy?
No, absolutely. Before I dive into that, if you run into a situation where you need good guardrails and the one available from a 1P API don't serve you well, use Llama Guard. It was specifically designed to have a flexible number of policies that you can enable or disable based on your use case, including medical advice. So, sorry, I had to have a cheap plug for my product. With respect to alignments, to Krishna's point, right, at the end of the day, security and safety is realized within the context of a particular use case and a particular product. So starting there and having a good understanding of what safe mean in this particular area is super important. From there on, you can have clarity into the policies that you want your model to adhere by. That's really the starting point. Once you have a better understanding of that, the next step from it is to start aligning your model. If you are a Meta or Google of this world, you can start very early on doing pre-training with trillions of tokens. For most of the developers here, obviously, I think that scale is probably not the part that is interesting, just unless you happen to sit on dozens of thousands of GPUs. But for post-training, one thing that you can do is from those policies, start generating content, either manually with humans or using large language models that are instructed or that you can steer toward generating the type of both good, bad, and borderline content that you need to align those models. Once you have this data, you can go for very standard supervised fine-tuning rounds and test your model performance based on a set of benchmarks that we'll have created that derive from your policy. That will get you somewhere. Today, some of the modern techniques, there's a lot of labs are moving slowly away from strong supervised fine-tuning to doing a lot more RL, either offline RL with things like DPO or more online RL with some ARPG-based techniques that tend to give you better results in terms of alignment than just doing pure large-scale SFT. Once you have that, then you can evaluate how the model that you've fine-tuned adhere to a set of policies that are very custom to the use cases that you care about. And then you're good to go from a training perspective. Obviously, as we've discussed, this is just one part of making your model safe for your particular use case. The other part is more around online deployment and additional tools that you can use to ensure that you have, in the end, end-to-end adherence for the policies that you care about. And those tools include things like the ability to hotfix, to do actor integrity, to do prompt rewriting, to eventually doing input-output classifications of whatever is generated, so that you can adhere as much as possible to the policies that you care about.
Thanks a lot. Moving beyond alignment, let's start discussing about responsible AI. And because responsible AI is something that if we were to ask people in this room, everyone may have a different definition. In fact, there is a research paper, I forgot the name of the researcher, but they were, I think it was called 20 different ways of defining fairness, and some of them were even conflicting with each other. So perhaps, Rachad, I know you have spent a lot of time working on responsible AI, both at Google and at Meta. So what does responsible AI mean to you in a practical and more product-focused setting, especially for solution builders here in the audience that want to comply with responsible AI expectations?
I like this question because what responsible AI mean has evolved and will continue to evolve over time. If you look at where we were, like, I don't know, 6 years ago, we're looking at responsible AI to essentially to build ML 2.0 system that works equally well for everyone. So there was a huge emphasis on fairness. There was some emphasis on privacy, transparency and control, robustness and safety. And at the time, that was extremely useful for what we considered like big models, which were like a recommender system and things of that nature. And you fast forward to where we are today, you still do responsible AI. It has morphed into called probably Gen AI safety or Gen AI trust, depending on how you want to say it. And even though some of the concepts are the same, the focus and the emphasis is very much on content generation risk and ensuring that what's generated stays within some sort of policy guidelines. Catastrophic risk and national security risk, ensuring that those models won't be able to help provide significant uplift or help trigger catastrophic events on various national security dimensions. So this has evolved quite a lot, even though it revolves around the same thing. In the end, to me, what we're trying to achieve is really building a system that are maximally helpful to people, and then that works equally well for everyone. And that helps encapsulate the various notions in terms of both performance, risk, safety, privacy that we do care about.
How does that compare for your experience and your position at Oracle?
So I agree with all that Rachad mentioned. Maybe to add to that, often some of the domains like healthcare, recruiting, or finance are often more regulated than other domains. If you happen to be working in such domains, it's important to think of compliance and regulatory requirements not as a checkbox exercise, but rather as a forcing function, right? As a way, as something that forces us to step back and think more. And I think that should be the perspective that we should adopt. We should not be doing things just minimally to meet the regulatory requirements, but instead to kind of, to Rashad's point, to make sure that whatever product we're building works well for all different groups of users and respects privacy and so forth. In that process, we ensure that we provide a better product experience for everyone. So in other words, even if there are no regulations or other forcing functions, we should be doing these kinds of things.
Correct. And Rachad, just coming back to you, we always talk, or in most of the cases, we are talking about responsible AI by design. But for builders or for teams that are not training their own models, but rather accessing them through APIs, how can they still embed fairness, transparency, or privacy in the end product or in the way that they are building the product?
No, that's an excellent question. We touched early on some of the moderation API that are provided by big API providers. And I think that's ground zero, where you have a number of tools provided by Azure, by OpenAI, by others, that allow you to at least help adhere to a set of pre-computed and preset policies that people may care about. With respect to things like fairness, at the end of the day, you have tools that allow you to kind of measure and potentially from that help you mitigate how your particular model is operating for the various demographic you care about. IBM has a suite of tools in 360. The previous team of mine built something called Fairness Flow that's very useful for that. On the privacy side, you have similar tools, things like Opacus that you can leverage, which are all open source tools that allow you to build AI that's reasonably fair and private. And then for things that are hosted, leveraging API providers tools is today the best option, the best way to go.
Thanks. So if we talk now towards more towards the governance and misuse, Jake, I know you were talking before about prompt moderation, and then at the moment where content is being generated, how to also ensure that it's being safe. That is probably easier to do for companies that have very large teams, trust and safety teams that can do all these kind of things at scale. But for those teams or for those companies that may not have that, what lightweight review processes or checks can they use before launching AI-powered features that can potentially minimize or protect from misuse or harm?
Yeah, so for smaller companies, the great news is that increasingly the answer to how to deploy safe AI is to leverage AI. You don't need to have a dedicated trust and safety team. We've talked about a couple of great options on the stage today about, off-the-shelf tools you can use to protect the safety of your products, leveraging LLMs. And, so that Rachad's not the only person supporting what his company's built, but both there's moderation API, there's the Llama tools, there's Harmbench, there's Home. Really you can go on the internet and search, and you'll find a lot of great options. And if you're searching, might I recommend ChatGPT? It's pretty good at that. But ultimately, I think the answer as we move forward is that how we align AI, how we deploy safe AI, increasingly we have tools in the form of AI for doing that. At OpenAI we have a really talented team with a bunch of people who have experience working in this space before. And one of the things we're constantly asking ourselves is, how can we replace legacy systems? How can we recreate prior art leveraging LLMs as opposed to relying on processes that have historically been more manual? Now that there are really cheap, fast models out in the industry, and the fact that there are reasoning models, there's just a wide variety of tools out there for how you can deploy models safely. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for humans. I want to be clear, my perspective is that for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a really great interaction between LLMs and humans in deploying safe AI. But for smaller teams, I would really encourage people to go and see what tools exist out there, so if building a trust and safety team is not on the immediate horizon.
Cool. And what about red flags to watch? So Krishnaram and perhaps Rachad, you can follow as well. What is a telltale sign that a product or feature might be at a higher risk for misuse, and that should trigger a safety review?
I think there are a few dimensions. One dimension would be who are the potential users of the product. To give an example from healthcare, the level of risk that we think about is different if the end users are, say, doctors as opposed to, say, patients. If it is doctors, the kind of queries that they may typically enter might be, we have a good handle on that. Whereas if it is end users like patients, then in some sense the level of risk that we perceive would be higher. So I think this is true even in, say, chatbot-like settings. If the chatbot is designed for an enterprise internal use versus its end user facing, the level of risks and the level of guardrails that you may need to have could be quite different. The other dimension I would think of is what is the probability and the potential damage of any harm or misuse that can happen. If it is, say, maybe recommending movies versus if you're recommending, say, something like medicines, the level of risks are very different. So that would be something that we should factor in depending on what is the extent of potential risk, what is the worst case as well as like the expected level of risk. The third dimension I often think about is how easy is it to course correct and reverse if needed. When I used to work at Amazon, we often thought in terms of one-way doors versus two-way doors. If some functionality that we are implementing is a two-way door, meaning we can kind of relatively quickly reverse if something goes wrong, there is greater appetite for taking risk as opposed to one-way doors where the cost of reverting is too high. So I think these would be some dimensions I would think about. Another related to the first one I mentioned would be also the way the European Union's AI Act is structured in terms of have for different domains and different applications where the levels of risks are different, the level of corresponding regulation is also different.
I really like your framework, actually. I will add a fourth dimension to that in a second, actually, maybe now, which is the model capability itself, because more powerful model in particular dimension creates novel type of risk that you need to be concerned about. Like if you have a model that has been trained to be extremely good at biology, it's going to be great for to help assist drug discovery and things like that. But the same capability will allow you to help develop bioweapon, and all of a sudden that becomes a new risk that you need to consider and take into account. But I really like your framework. I think at the end of the day, it has to start with a taxonomy of harms and risks that you care about. The second dimension around the demographics and the population that you're targeting. Like if you build, for instance, a regular chatbot, the interaction that you have with the general public, adult public, it's going to be very different from the interaction that you wish that this chatbot has with a 5-year-old kids or teenagers. And you need to take those into consideration because this will essentially require you to focus on different set of risks. The type of content that you generate for adult versus youth has to be triggered. The concern around child safety will be paramount and super important when you're addressing a younger demographic than an adult demographic, for instance. And then if you're targeting Rachad versus if you're targeting Krishna, you don't want a regular chatbot to give me very tangential health advice. I'm not a doctor and I might do something really stupid with it. Whereas if you're targeting a health professional, then that's quite the opposite and you probably will have less restriction there. So in the end, I think looking at those 4 dimensions is quite important because that's what will allow you to very early on tell if you're getting into a risky direction and also help you appreciate and decide the level of risk you want to take. The one-way door dimension that you mentioned, for us, we live that every day. What you can do at Meta on Meta control surfaces that use generative AI is quite a little bit different than what you can do using Llama directly, because in one case where it's fire and forget, we give you the weight they're out there and everybody can use it and replicate it, whereas on our API surfaces we can very much be as iterative as Krishna was suggesting, which is we can release some capabilities, test it, monitor, look at the prevalence of a particular harm, and then decide how we continue to scale it back, modify it, make it safe, make it more robust.
I think we are relatively well on time, so and I want to ensure that we leave around 5 minutes at the end for questions. So let me finish with 2 questions for each one of you, and we can do it in 2 rounds. So the first one is going to be about lesson learned, and the second one is about one advice that you would give to the builders in the room. So in terms of lesson learned, what is one lesson that you have learned from a near miss or a failure or something, and what would you do differently now? Who wants to start? You want to start?
Sure. I think the one lesson learned is that often in many teams and many companies might place a lot of emphasis on responsible AI related evaluation during the product development, but there may not be as much emphasis once the product is out. I think we should kind of care about these dimensions even after things are deployed. And not just about the responsibility dimensions, even dimensions like the quality of the application or the model, whether that is changing over time. In case we do not have an easy way to measure the quality over time, are there other indirect signals that we can capture and gauge whether the model or the application may not be performing as intended once deployed as compared to when it was tested before deployment. I think that would be one broad lesson. Perhaps a second lesson would be, if we are working on something and there is a concern about the way some evaluation is done, or whether we are kind of not addressing some privacy or bias or other kinds of issues sufficiently, safety and so forth sufficiently, it's good to think in terms of the front page test. If there were a front page New York Times or Wall Street Journal or whatsoever front page article about this, would that make you uncomfortable? If that's the case, it's good to step back, at least have a discussion with the relevant stakeholders and start thinking about what additional mitigations or measurements and so forth would need to be done, and at least start that kind of conversation.
Cool. Thank you.
I like that lesson very much, and it's very practical. I really like, especially the emphasis on continuous evaluation of risk and harm. I've been burned by that myself, so I can relate, and I think it's very practical at any scale. I think for me, one of the lessons that I have is, it's a very important one, but it's not. It's probably less applicable directly. Is to come back to the beginning of the conversation with respect to perfect safety, and the fact that at the end of the day it's a cost-benefit analysis. And it's always difficult when you have those conversations, right? Because you want to make things responsible and safe, and it's almost perceived as an absolute. But the reality, it is not. One perfect example was the previous company I used to work for, Google, invented the transformer technology and had very advanced LLM and chatbots in-house. Never released any of them, mostly because there was an absolute emphasis into almost nearly absolute safety until OpenAI revolutionized the space with ChatGPT. The lesson here is, at the end of the day, you can unleash great potential and great outcomes by understanding the cost-benefit analysis of what you're providing to the world versus the risk that you're unleashing, and trying to balance that by obviously minimizing risk and maximizing benefits.
I would say the biggest lesson I've learned, particularly in the past couple months, to build upon the last message, or the last answer I gave, is just what a game changer reasoning models are in this space. Traditionally, having worked on building ML models to detect and prevent harm, my mental model was always just like, well, this is an ML problem, and you need MLEs or data scientists to build solutions to solve these problems. And we have increasingly been finding people with non-technical backgrounds building policies, feeding them into reasoning models, and seeing just like mind-blowing results. And so I think that's been a really big lesson for me, is the extent to which breakthroughs in LLMs can democratize the impact that people can have, even if they don't have a CS degree.
So I think there is some level of overlap of these lessons learned and some of the suggestions for the people in the audience. So in the interest of time, and to ensure that there are some questions from the audience, if there are no questions, then we can go to the other round that I had, but I'm assuming that there is going to be questions because of the topic. So let's go for the Q&A. Yeah, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and then one of the volunteers with the green t-shirts will come and give you a mic.
My name's Dave. Thanks for the great panel. The wonderful thing about standards is there's so many of them. One of the things that I think is interesting, in my humble opinion, right now, there's probably a greater risk of human bad actors. And as the industry pushes towards agentic, the models are rapidly improving, and autonomy is in the same class as biological, nuclear, and chemical. A lot of people are pretty concerned about that aspect. I'm wondering, could you maybe talk about how you compare and contrast your approaches to governance, specifically transparency and safety levels when it comes to autonomy?
Are you directing the question to a particular speaker?
All of you would be great to answer if you could.
Any one of you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share a little bit about how we approach it. To be candid, we separate in this type of national security risk autonomy from the uplift you can provide in areas like assisting various entity to be able to develop biological agent or chemical agent and things like that. And the reason why we do that is today we think autonomy is still a little bit farther away. So yes, that's an area of concern, but it's not an area where we do a lot of large-scale testing for every single model that come out. But it will come. But with respect to the other national security risks, we do take that very seriously, and like many big labs, we have framework that we adhere by. We publish our frontier testing framework for this type of risk, for instance. And there, the way we approach it is that we look at the various threat scenarios and try to evaluate how enabling our model are for these particular threat scenarios across those dimensions. And those evaluations are done in multiple fashion. You can do that through a set of proxy evals that you can do on your model, integrated with things like open research and others, and other tools to improve the capability of a model with respect to being able to provide positive outcome in assisting either professionals, moderately skilled actors or non-skilled actors to develop this type of agents. And we do that through uplift studies, through these proxy evals. We also do more advanced testing by building models that are specifically designed to have a better outcome in those particular areas to see what the frontier is. And the reason why we do that is, unlike other actors, we actually do release our models in open source, so people have the ability to modify them and weaponize them for this particular concerning use cases.
It's interesting. I would say that my answer is pretty similar, which is that autonomy is self-improvement just in terms of the state of the models now. It's further away compared to some of the other catastrophic risks. I think we published with one of our recent product launches for deep research. It's not high on risk, but we can sort of see the path to getting high for biorisk, and so there's a lot more that we've been doing because we think that's like more clear and present risk. And a lot of it sounds very similar to what Rachad just mentioned. If I would layer in any additional context, one is that we consult a lot with external experts because we have some of the brightest minds on the planet, but they're not all the brightest bio researchers on the planet, for example. Not only do we consult them while we're doing evals, we also leverage their expertise as we're training models we develop in-house for detecting things like unsafe bio usage. And so while we, for many types of risks, we'll have sort of a catch-all, I mentioned moderation API, for some of these other risks, we will build multiple additional layers of classifiers because of some of these things are like needle in the haystack, so you need to have high recall classifiers to catch everything, then you need to have more specific, like very fine-tuned classifiers that are like, what type of usage is this? Is this benign? Is it dual use? It's clearly nefarious? And so I think as we approach other risks, we're thinking a similar playbook, but similar to, it sounds like how Meta is approaching this. AI self-improvement is a little bit further away, so we haven't, I think our playbook is not yet at the same place as some of the risks that feel much closer.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the three of you for answering all the questions.